Was Lewis Hamilton's problem in the Japanese GP really a simple one-time failure, or are we seeing something much more serious that could ruin his entire time with Ferrari? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Because what happened in Suzuka doesn't make sense. A driver who was in a podium position, who was doing everything well, who followed every instruction from a team, and suddenly starts going backwards without explanation. No errors, no extreme wear, without a clear reason from the steering wheel. And this is where everything gets even more disturbing, because Nico Rosberg, someone who knows better than anyone how Hamilton works under pressure, has released a message that completely changes the narrative. He's not pointing at Hamilton, he's pointing at Ferrari. And if Rosberg is right, this is not a problem with one race. It is the symptom of something much deeper that could affect the entire season. Stay until the end, because what lies behind this analysis not only explains what happened in Japan, it explains why Hamilton might be stuck in a problem that not even he can solve. The story really begins before the traffic light went out in Suzuka, because what happened with Lewis Hamilton in a Japanese GP cannot be understood without all the previous context that Ferrari and the driver himself had. We came from a moment in which it seemed that something had changed, where that podium in China had returned sensations that many already thought were lost, where even Hamilton himself began to send messages of confidence, of superiority, as if he were ready to return to the top. And that is precisely where everything becomes more shocking, because Japan not only breaks that trend, it destroys it completely. From the start of the weekend, Hamilton showed signs of being in control. Qualifying in competitive positions, staying in the fight, executing each phase correctly, everything indicated that Ferrari had enough pace to fight for the podium. And for much of the race, that was confirmed. Hamilton ended up in P3, in a solid position, managing the race like a 7-time world champion does, without making mistakes, without pushing too hard, simply waiting for the right moment to consolidate the result. But then, without warning, everything began to fall apart. Because what happens from that moment on is not normal within Formula One. We are not talking about excessive degradation, nor a bad strategy, nor a driver error. We are talking about a progressive loss of performance completely inexplicable from the outside, where Hamilton begins to lose positions one after another, unable to defend himself, unable to respond, as if the car had simply stopped competing. And the most worrying thing is that he himself confirms it. He was doing exactly what the team asked of him, managing energy, following the plan, but the car did not respond. That moment is key, because it completely changes the reading of the situation. When a pilot makes a mistake, there is room for analysis. When the strategy fails, there are clear culprits. But when everything runs correctly and performance still disappears, the problem goes much deeper. And this is where Rosberg's message begins to take hold, because what he sees is not an isolated incident, but the repetition of a pattern that had already been seen before. Ferrari, once again, shows a car that promises more than it can really sustain. A car that at certain moments seems competitive, even dominant in specific conditions, but that fails to maintain that level when the race enters its most critical phase. And this is not new. It is exactly the type of behavior that marked the previous season, where performance fluctuated inexplicably, leaving drivers exposed with no room to react. The hardest thing about all this is that Hamilton can do absolutely nothing to avoid it. And that's what makes this situation so delicate. Because when the limit is not in the pilot, but in the machine, everything changes. It is no longer about improving driving, adapting, finding tenths. It is a structural problem that conditions each result. And in a sport where every detail counts, that is a sentence. Thus, what happened in Japan stops being a simple bad race and becomes a clear alarm signal. A warning that, despite flashes of improvement, Ferrari still has not solved the core of its problems. And as long as that continues, every weekend will be a mystery, and every opportunity, like the one at Suzuka, could vanish in a matter of laps. This is where everything changes, because after what happened in Japan, the conversation stops focusing on Hamilton and goes directly to what Nico Rosberg interprets as the real problem. And its message is not soft, is not ambiguous, it is a cold, direct, and above all worrying reading. Rosberg doesn't see a pilot failing, he sees a system that doesn't work. Because when you analyze what happened in Suzuka, you don't focus on the final result, not even on the loss of positions. It goes much further. He looks at the pattern, in the constant repetition of the same type of failure that had already appeared before, and that Ferrari is still not able to correct. And here is the key to everything. This is not a circumstantial problem, it is structural. According to his analysis, the Ferrari shows performance peaks that are deceptive. Moments where it seems competitive, where it can even fight for podiums or something else, but that are not real in the long term. They are very specific windows where everything fits, but as soon as the conditions change, as happened in the second stint in Japan, the car simply falls apart. This perfectly explains what Hamilton experienced. It wasn't that I suddenly drove worse. It wasn't that he made mistakes. It was that the car entered a phase where its performance disappears, and the most serious thing, without there being a clear cause visible from the outside. And this is where Rosberg sends the harshest message of all. Because when a problem is not specific, when it is not a part that fails nor a bad strategic decision, but something that is part of the base behavior of the car, that means that it is at the heart of the project. And that's what's really alarming. Because it implies that Ferrari isn't failing in execution, it's failing in concept. Rosberg, with all the experience he has, identifies that these types of problems are the most difficult to solve. They are not fixed with a small update. They are not corrected from one race to the next. They require rethinking how the car works, how it manages energy, how it maintains performance in long runs. In short, they require time. And in Formula One, time is the only thing you don't have. Furthermore, there is a detail that further reinforces his argument, the contradiction. Just a few weeks ago, he himself had praised the behavior of the Ferrari, highlighting its consistency in tests and its tire management. And now, after Japan, the same car shows exactly the opposite in real racing conditions. That's not evolution, that's instability. And when a car is unstable in its performance, the driver is completely exposed. This is where the analysis becomes even more compelling, because Rosberg practically frees Hamilton of any responsibility. He doesn't say it explicitly, but he makes it clear with his reading. No driver, no matter how good, can fight against a car that loses performance unpredictably. And that changes absolutely everything. Because then the question is no longer what happens to Hamilton. The real question is, to what extent can Ferrari sustain a project like this without everything ending up collapsing? And the most disturbing thing of all is that Japan does not seem like an exception. It seems like a confirmation. And this is where everything becomes even more delicate, because after Rosberg's analysis, we are no longer just talking about what happened in Japan, we are talking about what can happen from now on. Because if the problem is really structural, as he suggests, then there is no quick solution. And that completely changes the scenario for Lewis Hamilton within Ferrari. Because a driver like Hamilton doesn't need to prove anything else. He is not in a learning phase. He is not building his reputation. He is at a stage where every season counts, where every opportunity to fight for a title is gold. And if the car isn't up to par consistently, it's not just frustration, it's wasted time. This is where a silent but very dangerous tension begins to appear. Because on the one hand, Ferrari needs time to correct these errors. But on the other hand, Hamilton cannot wait indefinitely for a project to work. And that time difference is what has historically broken great partnerships in Formula One. Rosberg lets it be seen when he remembers that wear and tear that had already been accumulating since the previous season. That feeling that, despite the efforts, the car does not respond when it matters most. And when that feeling is repeated race after race, it ends up affecting not only performance, but also confidence in the project. Because there is something that in Formula One weighs more than any technical data, the driver's confidence in his car. And in Japan, that trust is broken. Not because Hamilton made a mistake, but because he did everything right, and still the result was negative. Those types of situations are the most difficult to manage mentally, because they eliminate any sense of control. And when a driver feels like he has no control over the result, everything starts to change. In addition, there is another factor that aggravates the situation even more, and that is the competitive context. While Ferrari struggles to understand what is happening with its car, other teams continue to advance, continue to score points, continue to consolidate their projects. And in such a tight championship, losing performance intermittently is not just a specific problem. It is the difference between fighting for the title or being completely out of the fight. And this is where Rosberg's message becomes a warning. Because what he is saying deep down is that if Ferrari does not correct this problem at its roots, it does not matter the flashes that appear. It does not matter the isolated podiums. The project is not sustainable to aspire to the highest. And that puts Hamilton in a very uncomfortable position. Because right now, it doesn't depend on him. It depends on Ferrari being able to do something that, until now, it has not demonstrated, correct a deep problem in the middle of a season. And the big question that remains in the air is inevitable. Are we simply seeing a stumble in Japan, or the beginning of a problem that could mark Hamilton's entire time at Ferrari? Because if what Rosberg saw is correct, this has only just begun. And in the end, it all comes down to an idea that is much more disturbing than it seems. What happened in Japan was no exception. It was a revelation. Because when you put all the pieces together, Hamilton's initial performance, the inexplicable crash in the race, his own statements, and above all Rosberg's analysis, what appears is not a specific failure. It is a pattern that begins to repeat itself dangerously. Ferrari has a car capable of inspiring, but not sustaining that illusion. And that's the real problem. Because in today's Formula 1, the car that shines at times does not win. The one that is consistent wins. The one that always responds. The one that does not fail when everything is at stake. And right now, based on what we've seen and what Rosberg has interpreted, Ferrari is very far from that. The hardest thing to accept is that Hamilton is doing his part. He adapts, he executes, he makes the most of every opportunity. But when the limit is set by the car, there is no talent that can save him. And that turns each race into an unknown, an unequal fight where the result does not depend entirely on him. And that's where this problem stops being technical and becomes something much bigger. It becomes a threat to the entire project. Because if Ferrari doesn't find a real, deep and fast solution, every race like Japan won't be a surprise. It will be the norm. And in that scenario, the big question is no longer whether Hamilton can fight for the title again. The real question is how long this situation can last before everything starts to break down from within. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.